It's your observant lineman, Uche Nwaneri, and today we're going to talk about a hot button topic that has hit the waves in the NFL. Last week, the NFL's owners' meetings, which took place via video conference, brought up some new amendments that they wanted to add to the Rooney Rule. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Rooney Rule is a stipulation that's put in place by the NFL that requires teams to interview at least one ethnic minority for head coaching positions, as well as senior positions in the football operations department. Now, there isn't a quota that has to be met as far as hiring a head coach of an ethnic minority, but there is a quota that is required in terms of interviewing. So it's something like affirmative action, but not quite to the level that you saw in the government and how they enacted the affirmative action back in the 90s. But how this works in the NFL, we saw it kind of play out firsthand when the Cowboys were looking to hire a new head coach. Many people knew that Jerry Jones was already of the mind that he was going to hire Mike McCarthy, but he was required to bring in a minority head coach for a interviewing session before he can make an official hire. And he brought in the old Cincinnati Bengals head coach, Marvin Lewis. Now, to many, this was somewhat of a red flag in how the Rooney Rule has kind of worked in opposition of what its intentions originally were. As of today, there are only 4 NFL head coaches in the NFL who are minority coaches. Right now, you have Mike Tomlin with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Anthony Lynn with the Los Angeles Chargers, Brian Flores with the Miami Dolphins, and Ron Rivera with the Washington Redskins. But there have actually been amendments that have been proposed by the NFL in the last week for them to incentivize the hiring of minorities in positions as such as head coach, as well as senior positions in football operations, which has drawn a lot of criticism and a lot of controversy, mainly because you have a situation now where coaches are not going to be necessarily convinced that they were chosen for the specific skill sets that they bring to a franchise. And that can undermine the respect and the authority of that coach once they enter into that franchise, because one, as they come in, they're not sure if they're a hire that was intended specifically because of what they can bring to the table, or the fact that it would allow them, the franchise itself, to move up 6 to 10 spots in the 3rd round because they made that hire. And that, in and of itself, is a slap in the face of any person who's trying to be hired for a job, regardless of their race, regardless of their ethnicity. You look at a situation and you want to be hired on the merits of your skills and what you bring in value to the franchise, rather than that you're being, the team will be rewarded for bringing you on as a member of their staff. Louis Riddick is one of the voices that has come out to speak up against the incentivizing of minority hires for draft picks, mainly because of his experience that he had back in 2017 when he was actually interviewing for the general manager job with the New York Giants.
Now, in my experiences, as far as interviewing for general manager jobs, I have repeatedly and consistently pointed to the fact that when I interviewed for the New York Giants general manager job, I came out of that meeting as a fan of Mr. John Mara, as someone who really respected how he treated me during that entire process, how Steve Tisch treated me during that process. It's ironic that owners are voting on something today, on a proposal today that the diversity committee is bringing to the table. They're voting on something that they, in fact, are responsible for. Okay, they're responsible for the hiring or not hiring of minority head coaches and general managers, and yet they're right now voting on whether or not they should incentivize themselves to go ahead and carry through with some of the things that the Rooney Rule was intended to do. That's very ironic to me. I mean, so in essence, you're saying that I myself, or we as owners are voting on something that we just can't in good conscience do on our own just because it's the right thing to do.
Now, he ended up not winning that general manager position and coming in actually second place in his runnings to get that hire, but he actually spoke out in saying that he was actually very pleased with how he was treated during the process. He felt a ton of respect for the Giants organization and how they handled it, and he felt like he obviously, lost out on that job fair and square. He was obviously disappointed, of course, but he didn't feel as if he was being brought in for a token-like hiring interview like you saw with Marvin Lewis. So there has been a good side and there has been a kind of awkward side to the Rooney Rule and how it is effectively played out. But I think that there is a lot that speaks for itself in how the coaches who are currently minorities in head coaching positions in the NFL have actually handled themselves. And their record of winning is something that can definitely play to the strength of what the Rooney Rule brings to the NFL. But also when you look deeper into the makeup and the build of many of these franchises' staffs, from coordinators to position coaches to assistants, and even, as far as general managers and football operations go itself, there is a true lack of minority representation in those parts of NFL franchises. Now, I'm not saying that I believe there should be a mandatory number of minority or ethnic minorities in any football administrative staff or football operations staff. A lot of the hires that are made in the NFL, a lot of the positions that people are able to attain within the NFL are attributed directly to the people that they know. You see this in a lot of the top tier franchises in the NFL. A lot of the position coaches, a lot of the coordinators, a lot of the people who deal with football operations are people who have some kind of connection to the ones who matter most in the authority hierarchy within the franchise. There are years-long connections that go on that football families, that coaching families have access to positions and access to certain levels of authority that you just don't have with these minority players, with these minority coordinators. A lot of times players are able to recycle themselves back into football through an assistant program within the NFL. And that's fine. Players come back in and they work their way up to create more value for themselves from a staffing standpoint and put themselves in a better position to be promoted to a more important, more authoritative position within that franchise. You groom those assistants to become executives. That's business 101. But at the same time, you see a lot of guys who make these weird jumps from, low rung assistants. And then the next thing you know, they're an offensive coordinator, or, position coaches who next thing you know, they've had 2 or 3 years as a position coach. And now all of a sudden they're a head coach. We saw that in Cleveland. We see that in Arizona. We see that with the Carolina Panthers, bringing in a coach from college who has no experience within the NFL and giving this guy $70 million, even though he doesn't really have any kind of true pedigree within the league that you can point at and say, this is a justification for paying him this amount of money. In the NFL, there are a plethora of minority assistants, minority position coaches who have the pedigree, who have the IQ, who have the knowledge, who have the experience with players within the league, the kind of traits that help create a quicker bond with chemistry, with building chemistry within the franchise, getting people to buy into a certain culture. These are things that, as a player, you look at and you say, this guy has an NFL pedigree. He's worked his way up, and now he's in a position as a head coach, as a coordinator, as a GM, where now he does automatically have the respect of the players who are around him. One of the hardest things for me as a player in the NFL was going into the first year with Gus Bradley as our head coach. And while a lot of players on the team had a great amount of respect for Gus Bradley as head coach, it was very hard to find that same level of respect amongst many of the position coaches, because many of the position coaches were guys who had no real NFL experience in coaching. These were guys who were coming from the collegiate level. These were guys who, you could tell just by the way that they handled game planning throughout the week that this was new to them. They weren't necessarily used to making these kinds of detailed presentations and deciphering and game planning and setting up the team to be in the best position to win because of the study and the work that they've done to break down the defense, to break down the offense of the opponents we'll be facing. You didn't see a lot of that. You didn't see a lot of it like you would expect with coaches that we had in the past who were all NFL veterans or NFL coaching veterans, had been around the league for decades, had, accrued so much knowledge in the sport on the professional level that there was no real doubt in the kind of credibility that they had with their players, because the players knew these were guys who had been there. These were guys who had seen all of these different scenarios that you'd have to deal with throughout the course of an NFL game. And that's not to say that, there's a knock on a coach who doesn't have that kind of experience, but you don't come into the NFL and have and be put in a position of power when you don't really have anything to show that would justify that power being given to you. So there are things that do absolutely need to be addressed as far as the problem with minority hirings at the head coach, general manager position, and senior football operation positions in the NFL. There's no doubt about that. I think we can all agree that there's something that needs to be done in order to balance the scale somewhat. Obviously, something that is now off the table, but the spirit of incentivizing a team for minority hires just does not sit well with me. And I just can't see how anyone who buys into the NFL's image of an ultra competitive environment where the best, where the strongest survive, can look at this and say that what's going on in the NFL right now is fair. But let me know what you guys think. Leave your comments down below. Hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribing to Uche Nwaneri, the Observant Lineman. Appreciate you guys for checking out this video, and we will catch you on the next one. Peace.